Good afternoon, everybody. Today I wanted to talk about using multiple businesses in an E-2 visa context. To what extent that's possible and to what extent it's possible for an applicant to have multiple businesses under their E-2 business for which they receive their visa. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name's Charles Raether, where for nearly 20 years we've been assisting entrepreneurs, professionals, and startup business people such as yourselves in utilizing their business goals in the U.S. to facilitate their transition for themselves and their families to the U.S., whether it's for short-term residency or long-term permanent residency. And so getting back to today's topic, E-2 visas and multiple businesses. The short answer is yes, this is all doable. The long answer is you need to make sure you do it correctly in order for it to be approved by USCIS. So the first thing to keep in mind is, let's take a step back. What exactly is required in a base scenario for an E-2 application? So in a base scenario, you have, let's say you opened an LLC and you've indicated you're going to run a bakery through that LLC. That LLC is going to be involved in, running the bakery. You've rented space for it. Here's the address for the bakery, etc. Very straightforward. Where things get a little bit more complicated is where clients consider adding new businesses or business lines. And that's something that we need to maybe distinguish here too. There's a difference between the two. If you're just adding a new business line, that just means you're keeping the exact same legal entity. And in addition to running your bakery that I gave in our example, you're also going to have a tax consulting company, for example. So technically you're not opening a new legal entity. You've got the same LLC, but that LLC will be engaged in running a bakery. And at the same time, and even this is a little bit silly and probably unusual, but just for purposes of our example, and we'll also be offering tax advice. Now, the question comes up perhaps, where is the location of this tax advisory service? If it's going to be run out of your bakery, then there's really nothing you need to report to USCIS about. I mean, it's the same company, it's the same location. It's just the company has expanded its business offerings, and it's, in addition to making cakes and donuts, it's also giving tax advice to its clients. A very unusual combination, but certainly something that's legal nonetheless. Where things get possibly more complicated is if your expanded business is going to occur in a different location, or if you're acquiring another company that will be executing and performing that new business line. So say, for example, your E-2 company wanted to purchase an existing company that provides tax advisory services. How would you handle that situation? Well, in that situation, there's different ways you could do it. You as the individual, you could directly purchase the tax company. You could do that. You would not have the right to work for that company because, again, remember, your E-2 limits you to working only for the company through which you filed for the E-2 visa. So you got the E-2 visa and then you decided, hey, I want to buy this tax company. It looks interesting. You can do that, but you have to be very careful about not crossing that red line about you cannot provide services to that second business. You cannot be employed by that second business. You can only be a passive shareholder. But another option that might be a little bit safer for you from the visa perspective is if you acquire the tax business through the E-2 business, would acquire the tax business. And as a result, then you would have the E-2 business, and one of the assets or the ownings of the E-2 business would be this tax advisory business. Now, again, you still would not be able to work directly for the tax business, but it's a more straightforward and maybe more simple, less dangerous structure by having it all go through the E-2 business. So that could be a possibility too. Now, again, here's the question. If my E-2 business acquires another, do I need to file a new petition? I think if you talk to different attorneys, different lawyers have various opinions on this. Our view and perception is as follows. If you're merely expanding onto the existing business that was declared in the E-2 petition and everything, we don't think you need to refile anything with USCIS until maybe when you're going to do your renewal. If you're doing your renewal, at that point you would say, hey, we have since grown, we've acquired this business, we've expanded, here's all the business we now do, this is et cetera. So meaning if you're not closing the original bakery business, you're not changing that address, all of that is continuing to work as before, you're just adding on to it. I do not believe that you need to make any kind of interfiling or new updates with USCIS, because everything that you initially declared is the same. It's just that the business has actually expanded and gotten bigger. Now, a different scenario, what could happen is, let's say you started the bakery business. After a year or two of doing this, you realize, oh, this is for the birds. I'm not making any money. I'm tired of getting up at 4 a.m. to bake the bread. I need a new business. I want to go into tax advisory services. And so let's say you sell the bakery business. Let's say you keep the actual LLC, but you just sell the business assets and you get rid of the lease agreement. And you take on the tax advisory business, or you acquire that. Again, how you structure it depends on whether you need to update USCIS. If you completely get rid of your bakery business, you no longer operate at that address, and the tax advisory business is in a different city, a different metro area from the bakery, I would say in that case you'd have to file an update with USCIS. I think it's a generally accepted unwritten rule that if you're more or less in the same city, like you get rid of the bakery business and then you decided to launch this tax business, if you're more or less in the same city, I think they'll generally be understanding that you do not have to file an updated petition to reflect that. You need to update that when you go to do your renewal, but I don't think necessarily if you're more or less in the same city, that usually doesn't bother USCIS. Again, if you want to be extra careful, or there might be some other extenuating circumstances, there might be cases where even though if you're in the same city, you might need or want to refile a new petition based on that new business you had just bought or were opening up. But again, I would say the general rule, as a rule of thumb, is if you're expanding upon the originally established business, generally you don't need to file any updates or new petitions. But if you're making a material change, you're getting rid of a bakery business and starting a tax business, and this is going to be in totally different states, totally different business models, et cetera, yes, then in that case you definitely would need to file an update. So hopefully this gives you a taste, a flavor of what's involved with having multiple businesses or multiple business lines with an E-2. It's generally quite resolvable. We're almost always able to come up with a solution that is satisfactory for our clients and at the same time meets all the immigration requirements. But you should discuss all the details with a qualified attorney with adequate experience in this in order to give you the best advice. If you are looking at an E-2 visa, or you already have one and you're trying to change your business or get rid of a business and add on another one, feel free to reach out directly to us so that we can personalize a strategy for you and your family to make the transition as efficient, effective, and comfortable as possible.